The crack of leather against flesh echoed through the dusty main street of Rawhide, Arizona Territory, 1878, causing birds to scatter from the hitching posts and onlookers to avert their eyes, all except for one. Blythe Whitaker bit back a scream as the whip found her back once more, tearing through her already shredded calico dress. 6 lashes for speaking against the town's most powerful man, Judge Hamilton Pierce, who watched with cold satisfaction from the steps of his courthouse. "Let this be a lesson," the judge announced to the gathered crowd. "No woman in my town will speak such slander against decent men of business and go unpunished." Blythe's knees buckled, but the ropes binding her wrists to the whipping post kept her upright. Her crime had been simple, publicly questioning the judge's decision to seize Widow Morgan's land after her husband's death. A technicality in the deed, the judge had claimed. Blythe knew better. The widow's land contained the only year-round spring for miles. 7 ought to do it, Pierce nodded to the deputy administering the punishment. 1 more to remember her place. As the whip rose again, a voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "That's enough." The deputy's arm froze mid-air. Judge Pierce's face reddened as he searched for the voice's owner. Samuel Lawson stepped forward, spurs jingling against the hard-packed dirt. His tall frame cast a long shadow in the afternoon sun, the silver star pinned to his leather vest catching the light. He'd ridden into town just 3 days prior, the new marshal sent by the territorial governor after the suspicious death of his predecessor. "This punishment exceeds what's reasonable for the so-called crime," Marshal Lawson said, his voice level but firm. His hand rested casually on his holstered Colt. Judge Pierce sputtered. "Marshal, you've been in Rawhide less than a week. You don't understand our ways. This woman has received more than justice demands." Lawson moved toward Blythe, drawing his knife to cut the ropes that bound her. "Court's adjourned." Blythe's legs gave way as the ropes fell away. Lawson caught her before she hit the ground, one strong arm wrapping carefully around her waist. "Dr. Franklin's office is this way," he said quietly. "The judge won't forget this," she whispered, her voice raw from holding back screams. Marshal Lawson's eyes, green as desert sage, met hers. "Neither will I, Miss Whitaker, neither will I." The doctor's office smelled of carbolic acid and medicinal herbs. Dr. Franklin, a kind-eyed man in his 60s with trembling hands, clucked his tongue as he examined Blythe's back. "The judge goes too far," he muttered, cleaning the wounds with gentle strokes. "Always has, but lately." Marshal Lawson stood by the window, keeping watch on the street below. "How long has Pierce been terrorizing this town?" "Since he arrived 5 years back," Dr. Franklin replied. "Brought money, brought connections, soon owned half the businesses and had the other half in debt." Blythe winced as the doctor applied a salve to her torn skin. "He's trying to force the smaller ranchers out, wants to control all the water rights before the railroad comes through." "Widow Morgan wasn't the first," Dr. Franklin added, "just the most recent." Lawson turned from the window. "And you spoke up for her." "Someone had to." Blythe met his gaze without flinching. "I teach at the schoolhouse. I've seen what happens to the children when their families lose everything." The doctor finished bandaging her back and helped her into a borrowed shirt, far too large but clean. "You need rest, young lady, at least a week." He glanced at Lawson. "She can't go back to her boarding house. Pierce owns it. He'll have her thrown out by sunset." Lawson nodded. "I've got a spare room above the marshal's office." Blythe stiffened. "I don't need charity, Marshal." "It's not charity, Miss Whitaker, it's protection." His expression softened slightly. "And I'd like to hear everything you know about Judge Pierce." After dark, Lawson helped Blythe up the stairs to the small apartment above the marshal's office. The space was spare but clean, a front room with a desk and 2 chairs, a small kitchen area and 2 bedrooms separated by a narrow hallway. "It's not much," he said, lighting a lamp, "but it's safe." Blythe looked around, still moving stiffly from her injuries. "It's more than I expected." Lawson set a kettle on the small stove. "Hungry?" "A little." She eased herself into a chair, trying not to let the pain show on her face. "I've got beans, bacon, and coffee." He pulled a few items from a cupboard. "Not much of a cook, I'm afraid." better than I'll get at the boarding house." A small smile touched her lips. "I can't cook worth a damn either. Mrs. Perry at the boarding house says it's why I'll never catch a husband." Lawson's laugh was unexpected, a warm sound that transformed his serious face. "Seems like a poor reason to choose a wife." As he prepared a simple meal, Blythe studied him. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, but there was something watchful about him too. He wasn't as young as she'd first thought, mid-30s perhaps, with lines at the corners of his eyes and strands of silver in his brown hair. "Why did you stop it?" she asked suddenly. "The whipping," he paused, spoon in mid-air above the pan of beans, "because it was wrong." Plenty of people in Rawhide thought it was wrong. Nobody else stepped forward. Lawson set 2 plates on the table and sat across from her. "I wear this star for a reason, Miss Whitaker. I believe in the law, but I believe in justice more. They're not always the same thing." "No." His eyes met hers. "They're not." They ate in silence for a few minutes before Lawson spoke again. "Earlier, I said I wanted to hear everything you know about Pierce. I meant it." Blythe set down her fork. "Why?" "Because I think there's more happening in Rawhide than meets the eye." He leaned forward. "I was sent here because the territorial governor received reports of corruption, land seizures, and suspicious deaths, including my predecessors." "Marshal Collins," Blythe nodded, "found dead in his bed, natural causes, they said." "A healthy man of 40 doesn't typically die in his sleep." Lawson's voice hardened. "Tell me everything you're thinking, Miss Whitaker, everything you know, everything you suspect. No one will punish you for speaking your mind here." The words sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. How long had it been since someone had actually wanted to hear her thoughts? "It might take a while," she warned. "I've got all night." He refilled their coffee cups. "And I'm a good listener." So Blythe began to talk. She told him about coming to Rawhide 3 years ago to take the teaching position. About watching as Judge Pierce gradually tightened his grip on the town, buying businesses, appointing cronies to key positions, manipulating land records. "The pattern's always the same," she explained. "He finds a technicality or creates one, challenges ownership. The case goes before him as circuit judge and he rules in his own favor." "That's a clear conflict of interest," Lawson frowned. "Who's going to challenge him?" "The nearest federal court is 2 days' ride and Pierce has friends there too." Blythe sipped her coffee. "Then there's the accidents." "Accidents? People who stand against him tend to have bad luck. Rancher Guthrie questioned a water rights ruling last year. The next day, his barn burned down with all his winter feed inside." Blythe's eyes darkened. "Marshal Collins started asking questions about land transfers the week before he died." As the night deepened, Blythe told him everything, every suspicious death, every questionable land deal, every rumor she'd heard while teaching the town's children. "The children know more than people think," she explained. "They hear their parents talking. Tommy Carson told me his pa saw Judge Pierce meeting with men from the mining company after dark. A week later, the Carson claim was jumped by armed men. Dawn was breaking by the time she finished. Lawson had filled pages of notes, his expression growing more troubled with each revelation. "You've been carrying this alone for a long time," he said quietly. Blythe looked down at her hands. "Not completely alone. There are others who know pieces, but speaking up." She gestured to her bandaged back. "Has consequences." Lawson nodded. "Why stay?" "You could have left, found another teaching position. The children need me." Her voice was simple but firm. "And someone has to witness, someone has to remember." Lawson studied her face in the soft morning light. The bruises on her cheek were darkening, but her hazel eyes remained clear and steady. "You're a brave woman, Blythe Whitaker." "Not brave," she shook her head. "Just stubborn. My father used to say it was my worst quality." "I'd call it your best." Lawson stood and stretched. "Try to get some rest. I need to make my rounds, but I'll bring back something for lunch." "Marshal," Blythe called as he reached the door, "be careful, Pierce won't take kindly to what you did yesterday." Lawson touched the brim of his hat. "I've dealt with men like Pierce before. They're dangerous, but not invincible." After he left, Blythe moved painfully to the window, watching as he crossed the street below. There was something solid about Samuel Lawson, something trustworthy that Rawhide hadn't seen in a long time. But that very quality made him vulnerable in a town ruled by corruption. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. For the first time in years, she had spoken freely, emptied her mind of every suspicion and fear. And instead of punishment, she had found understanding. The marshal had asked her to tell him everything she was thinking. No one had ever wanted that from her before. Over the next few days, Blythe's body slowly began to heal. The marshal insisted she stay in his spare room, claiming it was safer than returning to the boarding house. Each evening, they would share a simple meal, and the conversation would flow easily between them. She learned he had grown up in St. Louis, the son of a judge who had taught him that law without justice was merely tyranny. He'd been a lawman for 15 years, working his way from deputy in Kansas cattle towns to marshal in the Arizona Territory. "What about you?" he asked one evening. "How does a woman end up teaching in a place like Rawhide?" Blythe smiled faintly. "By running out of options elsewhere." She traced the rim of her coffee cup. "My father was a professor at a women's college in Boston. He believed in education for women, raised me to speak my mind. I'm guessing that wasn't popular." "Not particularly." She laughed softly. "I was engaged once to another professor's son. He admired my lively intellect until we were betrothed. Then he expected me to become a proper silent wife." "What happened?" "I caught him with another woman and ended the engagement. The scandal." She shrugged. "My father had already passed by then. The college let me go, said I was setting a poor example. I went west because I heard teachers were needed and questions weren't asked about your past. So you came to Rawhide." "Not directly. I taught in Colorado first, then New Mexico. Places grow wary of a woman who doesn't know her place." Her smile turned wry. "Rawhide was desperate enough to hire me 3 years ago." "Their good fortune," Lawson said quietly. The warmth in his eyes made her look away, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. Over the past days, something had shifted between them, a growing ease, a silent understanding. "I should check your bandages," he said, breaking the moment. Dr. Franklin left fresh supplies. It had become a nightly ritual, Lawson carefully changing the dressings on her back, his touch gentle and impersonal. Yet each night, Blythe found herself more aware of his presence behind her, the careful way his fingers moved, the sound of his breathing. Tonight was no different. She sat facing away from him, the borrowed shirt pulled up just enough to expose her wounds. "They're healing well," he said, his voice low. "The scars will fade with time." "Not all scars are visible," she murmured, his hands paused on her back. "No, they're not." When he finished, she pulled the shirt back down and turned to face him. "Thank you. No need for thanks." He began putting away the medical supplies. "Samuel." It was the first time she had used his given name. "Why are you doing all this?" He looked up, his expression unguarded for once. "Because it matters, because you matter." The simple honesty of his words stole her breath. Before she could respond, a pounding on the door downstairs broke the silence. Lawson was on his feet instantly, hand going to his gun. "Stay here." He disappeared down the stairs. Blythe heard muffled voices, then footsteps returning. Lawson's face was grim when he re-entered. "What's happened?" she asked. "Widow Morgan's house was burned to the ground tonight." He strapped on his gun belt. "She made it out, but barely. She's at Dr. Franklin's now." "Pierce," Blythe whispered, almost certainly, but proving it. Lawson shook his head. "I need to investigate. Lock the door behind me." "Be careful," she called after him. Alone, Blythe paced the small apartment. Pierce was escalating, growing bolder. First her public whipping, now arson. How long before someone died? She was still awake when Lawson returned near dawn, smelling of smoke and exhaustion. "You should be resting," he chided, seeing her at the table. "Couldn't sleep." She pushed a cup of coffee toward him. "How is Mrs. Morgan?" "Shaken, some burns on her hands." He sank into a chair. Someone blocked her door from the outside. If her dog hadn't started barking. "Did you find anything?" Lamp oil splashed around the foundation. Deliberate, he rubbed his face. "But no witnesses, of course." "And when I went to question Pierce, he was playing cards at the saloon all evening with the deputy and 3 businessmen to vouch for him. An alibi ready-made." Blythe wasn't surprised. He wouldn't do the dirty work himself, Lawson nodded. I'm going to telegraph the governor today. Request assistance. Pierce has too many allies here for me to handle this alone. That could take weeks. Blythe leaned forward. And Pierce knows you're a threat now. He won't wait. What choice do I have? Lawson's voice held frustration. I need evidence, witnesses willing to testify. Blythe was silent for a moment, thinking. There might be another way. Pierce keeps records, deeds, contracts, letters, if we could find them. Breaking into a judge's home or office, that's not exactly legal, Miss Whitaker. Neither is burning down an old woman's home. Her eyes flashed. Sometimes justice requires bending rules. A reluctant smile touched his lips. You're starting to sound like me. A dangerous development. She returned his smile. I've heard his clerk, Jenkins, keeps the most sensitive documents in a safe in Pierce's private study at home. Jenkins drinks at the Red Dog Saloon most nights. Lawson raised an eyebrow. How do you know this? Jenkins's son is in my class. The boy talks about his father's important work for the judge. Blythe shrugged. Children notice things. Even if that's true, we'd need the combination. Every man has weaknesses. Jenkins's is gambling and loose women. Blythe's expression was determined. Let me go back to teaching. I'll keep my head down, act properly repentant. People will talk freely around me again. It's too dangerous. Pierce hasn't forgotten. Which is precisely why it will work. He'll think he's won, that he's broken me. She reached across the table, touching his hand. Trust me, Samuel, I can do this. He turned his hand to grip hers. I do trust you, that's not the issue. Then what is? I don't want to see you hurt again. The admission seemed to cost him something. Some things are worth the risk. Her fingers tightened on his. This town is worth it. 2 days later, Blythe returned to the schoolhouse. She kept her eyes downcast in public, spoke softly, played the role of a woman who had learned her lesson. When she passed Judge Pierce on the street, she bowed her head respectfully. He nodded with smug satisfaction. Each evening, she returned to the marshal's office, shedding the meek persona like a snake's skin. Jenkins was bragging at the Mercantile today, she reported one night. Said the judge trusts him with information that could bring down half the territory. He was trying to impress Mrs. Holloway. Lawson nodded. I've been watching him. He drinks heavily, especially on Fridays when he gets paid. Tomorrow then? Blythe asked. Tomorrow? Lawson looked troubled. I still don't like involving you in this. I've been involved since the day I spoke up for Widow Morgan. Blythe's voice was firm. You can't keep me out of it now. Friday evening found them at the Red Dog Saloon. Lawson sat at a corner table, nursing a whiskey and keeping an eye on Jenkins, who was already 3 drinks in and eyeing one of the saloon girls. Blythe entered separately, wearing a dress borrowed from Dr. Franklin's housekeeper, lower cut than her usual attire, with her hair loosened from its usual severe bun. No one would expect the schoolteacher to be in such a place, which was precisely why the disguise worked. She made her way to the bar, ordered a sarsaparilla, and positioned herself within Jenkins's line of sight. It didn't take long. By his 5th drink, Jenkins had made his way over, his bloodshot eyes taking in her figure with obvious appreciation. Don't believe I've seen you in Rawhide before, madam, he slurred slightly, just passing through. Blythe smiled, lowering her voice to disguise it. My brother's a cattle buyer. I'm waiting for him to finish business. Cattle business, eh? Judge Pierce just acquired a mighty fine herd. Jenkins puffed up. I handle all his legal affairs, you know, most powerful man in the county. Is that so? Blythe widened her eyes with feigned interest. That sounds like important work. Very important. Jenkins leaned closer. I know things that would make your hair curl, miss. Secrets locked up tighter than a drum in the judge's safe. A safe? My, that sounds impressive. Custom made from Chicago. Jenkins was thoroughly enjoying her attention. Only 2 people know the combination, the judge and myself. Blythe leaned forward, letting him get a better view of her décolletage. I've always found men with responsibilities so fascinating. 3 hours and many drinks later, Jenkins was thoroughly intoxicated and infatuated with the mysterious woman who hung on his every word. When he excused himself to use the outhouse, Lawson appeared at Blythe's side. Anything, he's close to revealing it. Blythe's expression was determined. One more drink should do it. Be careful. Lawson's eyes held concern. He's getting handsy. I can handle him. Blythe gave a grim smile. And if I can't, I expect you to step in like a jealous suitor. Jenkins returned, stumbling slightly. Lawson faded back into the shadows as Blythe ordered another round. Where were we? Jenkins slurred, his hand finding her knee under the table. You were telling me about your important responsibilities. Blythe gently moved his hand while maintaining her smile. The judge's safe sounded so impressive. Nothing special. Jenkins leaned in conspiratorially. Just numbers, his wife's birthday and their anniversary, 8/15/70. Blythe committed the numbers to memory. How romantic. Not really. Jenkins snorted. He hated that woman. She died 6 years back. Keeps the combination to remind himself never to marry again, he says. By midnight, Jenkins was barely conscious. Lawson stepped in, playing the role of her brother, and helped her extract herself from the clerk's persistent attentions. Once outside, Blythe let out a long breath. I need a bath after that, she muttered. Did you get it? She nodded. 8/15/70. His late wife's birthday and their anniversary. Good work. Lawson guided her down the dark street. Now comes the difficult part. The following night, Judge Pierce attended a dinner at the territorial capital in Prescott, a 3-day journey. It was the opportunity they had been waiting for. The house would be guarded by only a single man, Pierce's manservant, who was known to retire early with a bottle of the judge's good brandy when his employer was away. Lawson and Blythe watched the house from the shadows until the lights went out. Approaching from the rear, they found the kitchen door. Lawson produced a set of slender tools and worked on the lock while Blythe kept watch. Where did a lawman learn to pick locks? She whispered. From outlaws. The lock clicked open. Sometimes useful skills come from unexpected teachers. They slipped inside, moving silently through the darkened house. Pierce's study was at the back, a wood-paneled room filled with leather-bound books and the smell of cigar smoke. Lawson closed the door before lighting a small lantern. There. Blythe pointed to a painting of a stern-faced woman. Jenkins mentioned the safe is behind his wife's portrait. Lawson moved the painting, revealing the metal door of a wall safe. Blythe stepped forward and carefully turned the dial, whispering the numbers aloud. 8/15/70. The mechanism clicked and the door swung open. Inside were stacks of documents, bundles of letters, and several leather-bound ledgers. We can't take it all, Lawson murmured. We need to be selective. For the next hour, they carefully examined documents by the lantern's dim light. Blythe found deeds with altered dates, letters from mining companies discussing secret arrangements, and a ledger recording payments to various officials. This one. She handed Lawson a bundle of papers. Land transfers for properties that had suspicious accidents, including Widow Morgan's. Lawson's expression hardened as he read. And here's correspondence about Marshal Collins. Pierce suspected he was investigating him. We need to copy these. Blythe pulled paper and pencil from her pocket. We can't take the originals without him knowing. They worked quickly, transcribing the most damning evidence. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside. They froze, extinguishing the lantern. The study door opened, and Pierce's manservant appeared, holding a candle and looking bleary from drink. Who's there? He called, his speech slurred. Lawson moved with surprising speed. Before the man could react, Lawson had him pinned against the wall, one hand over his mouth. We're not here to hurt you, he said quietly. Just looking for the truth. The man's eyes widened in recognition as he saw the marshal's badge in the candlelight. Lawson slowly removed his hand. You're making a mistake, Marshal, the servant whispered. The judge has friends in high places. High places can be brought low, Lawson replied. Are you loyal to a corrupt man or to justice? The servant hesitated, then sighed. I've worked for him for 8 years, seen things, heard things. Then help us, Blythe stepped forward. Tell us what you know. To their surprise, the man nodded slowly. Second drawer of the desk. There's a false bottom. That's where he keeps the most damning evidence. Lawson released him and moved to the desk. Sure enough, beneath a stack of ordinary correspondence was a hidden compartment containing a small journal and several official-looking documents with territorial seals. "Why are you helping us?" Blythe asked the servant. "My sister owned a small ranch north of town." His eyes were bitter. "The judge took it last year. She died of pneumonia the following winter, living in a tent with her children." While Lawson examined the hidden documents, Blythe quickly copied what they could. The servant who introduced himself as Edgar kept watch at the door. "The judge will be back in 3 days," Edgar warned, "and he always checks the safe first thing." "We'll be ready before then," Lawson promised, carefully replacing everything except what they had copied and the few original documents that Edgar suggested wouldn't be missed immediately. As they prepared to leave, Edgar stopped them. "There's something else you should know. The judge has ordered men to watch your office, Marshal, and he's particularly interested in Miss Whitaker's movements." Lawson's expression darkened. "Has he given any specific orders regarding her?" Edgar nodded grimly. "He plans to have her removed from the teaching position." "Said a woman of loose morals shouldn't be instructing children." "Loose morals." Blythe's voice rose indignantly. "He's spreading rumors about you and the marshal." Edgar looked uncomfortable, "saying you've been living in sin above the marshal's office." Blythe's face flushed. "That's ridiculous. I was recovering from injuries he ordered." "Pierce doesn't care about truth," Lawson said quietly, "only control." They slipped out the way they had come, Edgar promising to leave the back door unlocked if they needed to return. The night air felt clean after the oppressive atmosphere of Pierce's house. "What now?" Blythe asked as they walked swiftly through the shadows. "Now we send these copies to the governor," Lawson replied, "and prepare for Pierce's reaction when he returns." "We should separate," Blythe said suddenly. "If he's watching your office, me staying there only gives him ammunition." Lawson stopped walking. "Where would you go? The boarding house isn't safe." "Dr. Franklin would take me in and become another target." Lawson shook his head. "No. We stay together, safety in numbers." "But the rumors are already spreading." His voice softened. Unless you're concerned about your reputation." Blythe laughed without humor. "My reputation was in tatters the moment I spoke against Pierce. Besides, I've never much cared what people think of me." "Then why suggest separating?" She looked away. "Because I thought you might care about your reputation as marshal." Lawson touched her cheek, turning her face back toward his. "The only reputation I care about is being known as a man who stands for what's right." His thumb brushed her skin gently. "And right now, keeping you safe is what matters." The tenderness in his touch sent warmth spreading through her body. For a moment they stood close in the darkness, something unspoken passing between them. "We should get back," she whispered finally. "Yes." He didn't move immediately. "We should." The next morning, Lawson sent their evidence to the governor via a trusted stagecoach driver. Now all they could do was wait and prepare for Pierce's return. "He'll come for me first," Lawson predicted as they shared breakfast. "I'm the official threat. He'll try to discredit more subtly, through rumors and innuendo." Blythe nodded. "He'll try to turn the town against me, get the parents to demand my dismissal. We need allies." Lawson poured more coffee. "People brave enough to stand with us when Pierce returns." They spent the day quietly building support. Dr. Franklin was already in their corner. Widow Morgan, still recovering from her burns, pledged whatever help she could offer. The livery stable owner, who had nearly lost his business to Pierce the previous year, agreed to provide horses if they needed to leave town quickly. By evening, they had a small network of supporters, people who had suffered under Pierce's rule and were willing to risk opposing him. Still, Blythe worried it wouldn't be enough. What if the governor ignores the evidence? She asked as they sat on the small balcony outside the marshal's office, watching the sunset paint Rawhide's dusty streets in gold. What if Pierce's connections protect him? Then we fight another way. Lawson's expression was determined. "I didn't take this badge to enforce unjust power." Blythe studied his profile, struck by the quiet strength in his features. "You're not what I expected when you rode into town, Samuel Lawson." "No." He glanced at her, a hint of a smile in his eyes. "What did you expect?" "Another of Pierce's men." Someone who'd look the other way, take the easy path. She shook her head. Instead, you stopped a whipping and offered sanctuary to the town troublemaker. Troublemaker? His smile widened. Is that how you see yourself? It's how most see me. The spinster schoolteacher who doesn't know her place. I see a woman of remarkable courage. His voice deepened. Someone who speaks truth when others are silent, who risks everything for what's right. The admiration in his eyes made her breath catch. No one had ever looked at her that way before, like she was something valuable, something to be cherished rather than controlled. Samuel, she began, but was interrupted by shouts from the street below. They both rose quickly. A rider was galloping into town, his horse lathered with sweat. That's Bill Taylor from the Bar T Ranch, Blythe said, recognizing the man. They hurried downstairs as Taylor pulled his exhausted horse to a stop in front of the marshal's office. Marshal, he called, his voice urgent. Judge Pierce is returning early. His party was spotted crossing Harper's Creek not 2 hours ago. Lawson's face tightened. He shouldn't be back for another 2 days. Something must have warned him, Blythe said quietly. Taylor nodded. There's more, he's not alone. Got at least 6 riders with him, hard-looking men, not from around here. Hired guns, Lawson muttered. How long do we have? An hour, maybe less. Taylor swung down from his horse. Word is he's coming for you, Marshal, and Miss Whitaker too. Lawson turned to Blythe, his expression grave. We need to move, now. They had prepared for this possibility. Within minutes, Blythe had gathered her few belongings while Lawson collected weapons and ammunition. We'll go to the Widow Morgan's sister's place, Lawson said, checking his revolver. It's 10 miles outside town. Pierce won't expect that. What about our allies? Blythe asked. We can't just leave them to face Pierce's anger. They know to lay low. Lawson strapped on his gun belt. Taylor will spread the word we've left town completely. With luck, Pierce will follow us away from Rawhide, Doctor. Franklin arrived as they were preparing to leave, bringing his medical bag and extra supplies. I'm coming with you, he announced. My nephew can handle any emergencies here. It's too dangerous, Lawson objected. I'm 70 years old, Marshal. The doctor's eyes twinkled. Not much more damage life can do to me. Besides, someone needs to keep an eye on Miss Whitaker's injuries. As they slipped out the back of the marshal's office toward the waiting horses, Blythe heard the distant sound of multiple riders entering the far end of town. Pierce, she whispered. Lawson nodded grimly. Move quickly, but don't run. Running attracts attention. They made it to the livery stable without being spotted. The owner had their horses ready, Lawson's bay gelding, a gentle mare for Blythe, and a sturdy pinto for the doctor. Take the North Trail, the stable owner advised. It's longer but less traveled. Pierce's men will expect you to head east toward the territorial capital. They mounted up and slipped out the back of the stable, keeping to the shadows of buildings until they reached the edge of town. As they urged their horses into a trot, Blythe glanced back at Rawhide, wondering if she would ever see the schoolhouse again. They rode hard for an hour before Lawson called for a rest to spare the horses. As they watered the animals at a small creek, Dr. Franklin examined Blythe's back. Healing nicely, he pronounced. Still, try not to overdo it. Lawson kept watch from a nearby rise, scanning the trail behind them. Any sign of pursuit? Blythe asked, joining him. Nothing yet, he frowned. That worries me. Pierce wouldn't give up so easily. Maybe he believes we've fled toward Prescott. Maybe. But Lawson didn't sound convinced. They continued toward Widow Morgan's sister's ranch, reaching it shortly after nightfall. The modest homestead sat in a small valley, sheltered by cottonwoods and hidden from the main trail. Martha Simmons, the widow's sister, welcomed them warmly. Sarah sent word you might be coming, she said, ushering them inside the snug cabin. Any friend of hers is welcome here. Over a simple but hearty meal, they explained the situation. Martha listened with growing anger. That man has terrorized this county long enough, she declared. My Henry stood against him 2 years ago when he tried to divert our creek. Next thing we knew, Henry was accused of rustling, spent 3 months in jail before the charges were dropped for lack of evidence. Did he have any legal right to your water? Lawson asked. None whatsoever. Our deed is clear as day. Martha poured more coffee. But facts don't matter much to Judge Pierce when he wants something. They will now, Blythe said firmly. We have evidence of his corruption, real evidence. If the governor acts on it, Dr. Franklin added. And if Pierce doesn't find us first, Lawson said quietly. That night they took turns standing watch. Blythe insisted on taking a shift despite Lawson's objections. I'm not an invalid, she told him firmly, and I can shoot if necessary. Lawson raised an eyebrow. Can you now? My father believed women should know how to defend themselves. She smiled at his surprise. I'm quite good with a rifle. During her watch, Blythe sat on the small porch, rifle across her lap, listening to the night sounds. The darkness felt alive with possibilities both terrifying and exhilarating. A week ago, she had been a schoolteacher trying to make small differences in her students' lives. Now she was a fugitive, helping to bring down the most powerful man in the county, and then there was Samuel Lawson. In the quiet of night, she allowed herself to acknowledge the growing feelings between them. It wasn't just gratitude for his protection or admiration for his principles. There was something more, a connection that had formed in the shared dangers and quiet conversations of the past days. The door opened softly and Lawson stepped out to join her. My watch doesn't start for another hour, he said, settling beside her on the porch step. Couldn't sleep, she asked. He shook his head. Too much on my mind. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the chorus of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. What will you do when this is over? Blythe asked finally. If we succeed against Pierce, Lawson considered. Continue as marshal, I suppose, if the town still wants me. And if they don't? There's always need for a lawman somewhere. He glanced at her. What about you? Will you stay in Rawhide? Blythe looked out at the starlit landscape. I don't know, the children need me, but she sighed. Even if Pierce is gone, the town might not want a troublemaking schoolteacher. You could come with me. The words seemed to surprise him as much as her. With you, Blythe turned to face him, if I have to move on. His eyes held hers in the darkness. We make a good team, Blythe. Her heart quickened at the implication. As what, Marshal? Your deputy? As whatever you want to be. His voice was low. To me, the moment stretched between them, fraught with unspoken possibilities. Slowly, Lawson reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. I've never met anyone like you, he murmured. So brave, so determined, Samuel. Her voice was barely a whisper. He leaned forward, his lips finding hers in the darkness. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, then deepened as she responded. His hand cradled her face while hers gripped the front of his shirt, drawing him closer. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. Lawson rested his forehead against hers. I should have waited, he said softly. Asked permission, you have it, Blythe smiled. Now and whenever you might want it again, he chuckled, the sound warm in the night air. That might be quite often, Miss Whitaker. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the porch, instantly shattering the moment. Both of them tensed, Blythe raising the rifle while Lawson drew his revolver. Who's there? Lawson called, positioning himself slightly in front of Blythe. Silence, then another snap. Lawson fired a warning shot into the air. Show yourself, a horse whinnied nervously, and a figure emerged from the shadows, hands raised. Don't shoot, Marshal, it's me, Edgar. Lawson lowered his weapon slightly. Pierce's man, what are you doing here? Edgar stepped into the moonlight, his face anxious. Bringing warning. The judge knows where you are. He sent men to surround the ranch at dawn. How did he find us? Blythe demanded. One of the stable boy's brothers rides with Pierce. The boy mentioned where you were headed. Edgar looked genuinely distressed. I rode as hard as I could to get here first. Lawson studied him suspiciously. Why would you betray your employer to help us? I told you about my sister. Edgar's voice hardened. And I've seen what the judge does to people who cross him. Even if you got away, he'd take revenge on those left in town. Dr. Franklin's nephew, the stable owner, Widow Morgan. How many men is he sending? Lawson asked. 8, including his new deputy. Edgar glanced nervously over his shoulder. They'll be here by sunrise. Blythe and Lawson exchanged looks. We need to move, she said. No, Lawson's expression became determined. We're done running. What do you mean? Pierce thinks he has us trapped. He doesn't know we've been warned. Lawson turned to Edgar. Did he remain in town? Edgar nodded. At his house, waiting for word of your capture. Then we use this. Lawson's eyes gleamed in the darkness. 8 men surrounding a small ranch with only one apparent exit, but if we're not here when they close the trap. We can get behind them, Blythe finished, catching his plan. Better, Lawson smiled grimly. We can get to Pierce while his hired guns are out here. They woke Dr. Franklin and Martha, quickly explaining the situation. Martha immediately suggested a solution. There's an old mining tunnel that runs from the root cellar toward the creek, she explained. Henry used it during the Apache troubles years back. It comes out in a thicket about half a mile away. Perfect, Lawson turned to Edgar. You'll need to stay here. If they see you've warned us, your life won't be worth a plugged nickel. Edgar nodded. I'll say I was sent to scout ahead, found the place empty. We'll leave evidence we departed in haste. Martha was already gathering supplies. Mess up the beds, leave food half-eaten. Doctor. Franklin, you should stay as well, Lawson said. You can claim they forced you to tell where we were heading. The doctor bristled. I'm coming with you. Your nephew is still in town, Blythe reminded him gently. If Pierce suspects you helped us escape, that gave the old man pause. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. Very well, but be careful, both of you. Within half an hour, they had prepared the scene and gathered what they needed. Martha led them to the root cellar and revealed the hidden entrance to the tunnel, a low opening behind stacked barrels of preserved vegetables. It's not comfortable, she warned, lighting a lantern, but it's solid. Henry reinforced it himself. The tunnel was narrow and smelled of damp earth, forcing them to crouch as they made their way through the darkness. Blythe's back protested the awkward position, but she gritted her teeth against the pain. Almost there, Lawson encouraged from behind her. Finally, they emerged into the pre-dawn grayness in a dense thicket near the creek. After catching their breath, they made their way carefully to where Martha had told them they would find an old trapper's cabin with horses. If we ride hard, we can reach Rawhide before midday, Lawson said as they mounted up. Pierce won't expect us to double back. What exactly is your plan? Blythe asked as they urged the horses into a trot, taking a circuitous route to avoid Pierce's men. Pierce will be vulnerable with most of his allies away from town, Lawson explained. We go directly to his house, find additional evidence if possible, and place him under citizen's arrest. Just the two of us, against a man who won't hesitate to kill. Lawson's expression was serious. It's risky, I know, but we may never get another chance like this. The governor's men won't arrive for days if they come at all. Blythe considered this, then nodded firmly. I've never backed down from a fight that matters. I won't start now. They rode in silence for a time, picking their way through ravines and dry washes to stay hidden. As the sun rose higher, the heat built quickly, forcing them to slow their pace to preserve the horses. We should rest here, Lawson suggested as they reached a small spring sheltered by cottonwoods. Let the horses drink and cool down. As they dismounted, Blythe winced, her hand going to her back. You're in pain, Lawson observed, his brow furrowing with concern. It's nothing, she dismissed. Just stiff from riding. Lawson didn't look convinced. Let me check your bandages. Despite her protests, he insisted on examining her back. The cool shade of the cottonwoods provided privacy as she reluctantly turned her back to him and lifted her shirt just enough to reveal the bandages. There's fresh blood, he said, his fingers gently probing the dressings. The tunnel crawling must have reopened some of the wounds. It doesn't matter, Blythe insisted. We can't turn back now. No one's suggesting that. He retrieved the small medical kit Martha had provided. But infection out here could kill you faster than Pierce. As he cleaned and redressed her wounds, Blythe found herself increasingly aware of his touch, clinical yet somehow intimate. The events of the previous night came rushing back, his lips on hers, the promise in his words. About last night, she began hesitantly, his hands paused on her back. Yes, did you mean what you said? About me coming with you if you had to leave Rawhide? Lawson was quiet for a moment, his fingers resuming their gentle work. I meant every word, he finally said. Though perhaps I should have waited for a more appropriate time to say it. Blythe smiled, though he couldn't see her face. When is it ever an appropriate time in lives like ours? He finished securing the fresh bandage and helped her lower her shirt. When she turned to face him, his expression was serious. "Blythe, I know we've known each other only a short time. Time is measured differently in circumstances like these," she interrupted softly. "Days can reveal more of a person's character than years of ordinary acquaintance." True enough. A smile touched his lips. "And what has our time revealed to you? That you're a man of principle, someone who does what's right regardless of cost." Her eyes held his. "Someone I could care for deeply." The admission hung in the air between them. Lawson stepped closer, his hand coming up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "When this is over," he said quietly, "I'd like to court you properly, if you'd permit it." Blythe laughed softly. "I believe we're well past the point of formal courtship, Marshal Lawson." His answering smile warmed his eyes. "Nevertheless, there are some traditions worth observing." He leaned down, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. Blythe's arms slipped around his neck, drawing him closer despite the protest from her injured back. When they finally parted, Lawson rested his forehead against hers. "We should continue on," he murmured, though he made no move to step away. "Yes," Blythe agreed, equally reluctant. "Pierce will wonder where his men are soon enough." They mounted up and continued their journey toward Rawhide, the shared moment adding a new dimension to their determination. They were no longer fighting just for justice or for the town, they were fighting for a future together. By mid-afternoon, they reached the outskirts of town. Rawhide seemed unusually quiet with few people on the streets. They left their horses at the livery stable, where the owner greeted them with surprise and relief. "Word is, Pierce sent men to capture you at the Simmons Ranch," he whispered. "No one expected you back here." "That's what we're counting on," Lawson said grimly. "Is the judge at his house? Far as I know, he's barely left it since you fled, except to check your office for any evidence you might have left behind." "And our allies?" Blythe asked. "Are they safe?" The stable owner nodded. "Keeping their heads down, as advised, though the school board met yesterday to discuss your replacement. Pierce pushed for immediate action." Blythe's jaw tightened. "Of course he did." "Is there a back way to Pierce's house?" Lawson asked, checking his revolver one last time. "Through the alley behind the mercantile. His garden gate is usually unlocked during the day." They made their way carefully through town, staying to side streets and alleys. Few people were about in the afternoon heat, which worked to their advantage. As they approached Pierce's house, Lawson pulled Blythe into the shadow of a storage shed. "I want you to wait here," he said firmly. "Absolutely not." Her eyes flashed. "We do this together." "Blythe, he's dangerous. If something goes wrong, then we'll face it together." She placed her hand on his arm. "You asked me to tell you everything I was thinking that first night. Well, I'm thinking I won't let you face this alone." Lawson studied her face, then nodded reluctantly. "Stay behind me. If I say run, you run. No arguments." They approached the garden gate cautiously. As the stable owner had predicted, it was unlocked. The garden was well tended, with roses and fruit trees providing shade from the harsh sun. A veranda ran along the back of the house, its doors standing open to catch any breeze. From inside, they could hear voices. Pierce and another man engaged in what sounded like an argument. "I paid you good money for results, Bolton." Pierce's voice was angry. "You assured me you could handle a troublesome marshal and a schoolmarm." "Your information was wrong," another voice replied defensively. "They weren't at the Simmons place. Looks like they lit out in the night." Lawson and Blythe exchanged glances. "Bolton must have returned ahead of the others." "Then find them," Pierce shouted. "I want them found before any word reaches the governor. That meddling schoolteacher has caused enough trouble." "What about the evidence they took? The documents?" There was a crash, as if Pierce had struck something. "Find them and the evidence disappears." "The marshal's word against mine won't stand, not with my connections." Lawson motioned for Blythe to stay back, then stepped onto the veranda, his gun drawn. "Your connections won't help you now, Pierce," he announced. Both men whirled toward the door. Pierce stood behind his desk, face flushing red with shock and fury. Bolton, a hard-faced man with a cavalry mustache, reached for his gun. "I wouldn't," Lawson warned, his revolver unwavering. "Drop the gun belt, slowly." Bolton hesitated, then complied, unbuckling his gun belt and letting it fall to the floor. "This is outrageous," Pierce sputtered. "Breaking into my home. I'll have your badge for this, Lawson. You'll have plenty of time to file complaints from territorial prison." Lawson stepped further into the room, keeping both men covered. "Judge Hamilton Pierce, I'm placing you under arrest for corruption, fraud, abuse of power, and conspiracy to commit murder." "On what evidence?" Pierce sneered, regaining some composure. "Your word." "A discredited marshal and a whipped schoolteacher?" "On the evidence we've already sent to Governor Fremont," Blythe said, stepping into the room behind Lawson. "Along with sworn statements from multiple citizens you've wronged." Pierce's face went from red to white. "You're bluffing." "The land deeds with altered dates, the correspondence with mining companies about bribes, records of payments to officials." Lawson smiled coldly. "Your meticulous record-keeping will be your downfall, Judge." Bolton's eyes shifted between Pierce and the door, clearly calculating his chances. Lawson noticed. "Don't even think about it, Bolton. I can put a bullet in you before you take 2 steps. "He's not worth dying for," Blythe added. "Pierce will sacrifice you in a heartbeat to save himself." Something in her words struck home. Bolton's shoulders slumped slightly. Pierce saw it too. "She's lying," he hissed. "Stand with me and you'll be well rewarded when this farce is over." "There's only one way this ends, Pierce," Lawson said firmly. "With you in custody awaiting trial." For a moment it seemed Pierce might surrender. Then his eyes hardened and his hand moved beneath his desk. "Samuel, he has a gun," Blythe cried. Lawson fired as Pierce's hand emerged with a derringer. The judge staggered back, clutching his shoulder as the small gun clattered to the floor. Bolton seized the moment of distraction to lunge for his discarded gun belt. Blythe, reacting with surprising speed, grabbed a heavy paperweight from Pierce's desk and brought it down on Bolton's head. The man collapsed with a groan. "Are you hurt?" Lawson asked urgently, keeping his gun trained on the wounded judge. "I'm fine," Blythe assured him, retrieving Bolton's gun belt and tossing it out of reach. Pierce slumped into his chair, his face gray with pain and fury. "You'll regret this," he gasped. "Both of you." "The only regret here is that it took so long to bring you to justice," Blythe replied. The gunshot had attracted attention. They could hear shouts and running feet approaching the house. Lawson moved to the front door, keeping Pierce in his line of sight. "In here," he called. "Marshal Lawson." "Judge Pierce is under arrest." Several townspeople appeared, their expressions shocked as they took in the scene: the wounded judge, the unconscious Bolton, and the determined marshal and schoolteacher. "Someone fetch Dr. Franklin's nephew," Lawson ordered. "The judge needs his shoulder tended. And send word to Sheriff Davis in Prescott that I have Judge Pierce in custody on multiple charges." As the initial chaos subsided, Lawson secured both Pierce and the still groggy Bolton. "Within an hour, Doctor." Franklin's nephew had treated Pierce's wound, and a group of trusted citizens were standing guard while awaiting reinforcements from the county seat. Word spread quickly through Rawhide. By evening, the town was buzzing with the news: Judge Pierce arrested, the marshal and schoolteacher returned from the dead, evidence of corruption sent to the governor. Blythe and Lawson found themselves in the marshal's office, finally able to catch their breath after the day's events. Through the window, they could see townspeople gathering in small groups, discussing the dramatic turn of events. "It's not over yet," Lawson cautioned as he cleaned his revolver. "Pierce still has allies. The governor still has to act." "But we've taken the first step," Blythe replied, pouring coffee for both of them. "And sometimes that's the hardest part." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the events of the past days settling around them like dust after a storm. "You were remarkable today," Lawson said suddenly. "Quick thinking with that paperweight," Blythe smiled. "My father always said my sharp mind would get me in trouble. Maybe sometimes it can get me out of it too." "I'd say it definitely did." Lawson set his cleaned gun aside and took her hand. "Blythe, about what we discussed earlier." A knock at the door interrupted him. It was Dr. Franklin, newly returned from the Simmons Ranch and beaming with pride. "I hear you two have been busy in my absence," he chuckled. "Thought you might want to know a telegram came for you, Marshal, just before I left Martha's place." The governor has received your evidence and is sending the attorney general with a detachment of territorial rangers. They'll be here within 2 days. Blythe and Lawson exchanged relieved glances. That's the best news we could have hoped for, Lawson said. Indeed. The doctor's eyes twinkled as he glanced between them. I'll leave you two to celebrate, though perhaps with less excitement than you've had lately. After he left, Blythe turned to Lawson with a smile. You were saying, Marshal, before we were interrupted. Lawson's expression grew serious as he took both her hands in his. I was saying that life in these territories is unpredictable, dangerous sometimes, not always suitable for a woman of education and refinement. Is that what you think I am? Blythe laughed softly. Refined. I think you're the bravest, most principled woman I've ever known. His thumbs traced circles on her palms. And I think I'm falling in love with you, Blythe Whitaker. The simple declaration stole her breath. Samuel, you don't have to say anything, he added quickly. I know it soon. I know we have much to learn about each other. But these past days have shown me what kind of woman you are, and she silenced him with a kiss, rising from her chair to press her lips firmly against his. His arms went around her, careful of her injured back, drawing her closer. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered when they finally parted. Though heaven knows it's terribly impractical. His laugh rumbled through his chest. When have either of us been practical? The next 2 days passed in a flurry of activity. Pierce and Bolton remained under guard in the town's small jail, joined by the returning gunmen who had been sent to capture Blythe and Lawson at the Simmons Ranch. The town seemed to emerge from a long shadow, with people speaking more freely than they had in years. Edgar, Pierce's former servant, provided additional testimony about the judge's corrupt dealings. Widow Morgan and her sister Martha arrived from the ranch, bringing more documentation they had found hidden in Henry's old papers, evidence of Pierce's earliest land grabs in the area. Through it all, Blythe and Lawson worked side by side, gathering statements, organizing evidence, and preparing for the Attorney General's arrival. Their partnership had evolved into something both professional and deeply personal, noticed by the townspeople with varying degrees of approval and speculation. The school board, initially inclined to dismiss Blythe for her scandalous living arrangement with the marshal, reconsidered in light of her role in exposing Pierce. The chairman even offered a formal apology for believing the judge's insinuations about her character. Though perhaps, he added awkwardly, some consideration of propriety moving forward. I understand completely, Blythe replied with perfect composure. Marshal Lawson has already spoken to Reverend Michaels about performing a ceremony. The chairman's surprised expression had been worth the presumption. When she later related the exchange to Lawson, he'd raised an eyebrow. Have I now? He asked, amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. Speaking to the reverend without consulting the bride seems rather presumptuous. I took liberties with the timeline, Blythe admitted. Not with the intention. His smile had been answer enough. When the Attorney General arrived with his escort of rangers, the atmosphere in Rawhide shifted from cautious optimism to celebration. Judge Pierce and his accomplices were formally charged and transported to the territorial capital to await trial. The Attorney General, impressed by the thoroughness of the evidence Lawson and Blythe had compiled, promised that justice would be served. The governor sends his personal thanks, he told them during a meeting in the marshal's office. He's been concerned about reports from this county for some time, but lacked sufficient cause to intervene until now. There are still Pierce's allies to deal with, Lawson pointed out. Men who benefited from his corruption, indeed, which is why the governor would like you to continue as marshal here with expanded authority to investigate and clean up the county. The Attorney General turned to Blythe, and he was particularly impressed by your contributions, Miss Whitaker. He suggests that education needn't be your only calling if you have interest in more official capacity. Blythe blinked in surprise. What sort of capacity? The county needs a new circuit judge, someone with intelligence, moral courage, and commitment to justice. The Attorney General smiled. The governor believes you possess all 3 qualities in abundance. But I'm not a lawyer, Blythe protested, "and I'm a woman. Legal training can be arranged. As for being a woman," the Attorney General shrugged, "the territories often lead where more settled regions fear to tread." "Think on it." After he left, Blythe sat in stunned silence. "A judge," Lawson mused, leaning against his desk. "It suits you. It's impossible," she replied automatically. "Is it?" He crossed his arms. "You spoke up when an entire town was silent. You risked your life for justice. You have the sharpest mind I've ever encountered." A smile touched his lips. "And you look magnificent in righteous indignation." Despite herself, Blythe laughed. "You're mad." "Perhaps." He knelt before her chair, taking her hands. "But I'm also right. You would be extraordinary, Blythe. As a judge, as a teacher, as anything you choose to be." She studied his face, the sincerity in his eyes warming her. "And what about us, if I were to pursue such a path? I told you once we make a good team." His hands tightened on hers. "That doesn't change whether you're teaching children or presiding over a courtroom." A marshal married to a judge. Blythe shook her head, but she was smiling. "People would talk. People always talk." Lawson's expression grew serious. "The question is, what do you want, Blythe? Not what others expect or what tradition dictates. What do you want for your life?" It was a question no one had ever asked her before, not her father, for all his progressive ideas about women's education. Not her former fiancé, who had admired her mind but expected her to silence it after marriage. Not even herself, trained as she was to think in terms of what was possible rather than what was desired. "I want," she began slowly, "to make a difference. To use whatever abilities I have to create something better than what came before." Her eyes met his. "And I want you beside me while I do it." Lawson's smile was like sunrise breaking across his face. "Then that's what we'll do." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "I've been carrying this for 2 days, waiting for the right moment." In his palm lay a simple gold ring with a small pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Not fancy, but given with love." He took a breath. "Blythe Whitaker, will you marry me? Be my partner in all things as we build something better together." Tears sprang unexpectedly to Blythe's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Blythe stood on the porch of their new home on the outskirts of Rawhide. The small ranch house wasn't grand, but it offered privacy, space for Blythe's books, and room enough should their family grow. Behind her, she could hear Samuel in the kitchen, his deep voice humming a tune as he prepared coffee. The past months had brought many changes to Rawhide. Judge Pierce and his closest allies had been convicted and sentenced to prison terms. The land they had stolen was being returned to its rightful owners, including Widow Morgan, who was now comfortably resettled on her property. Blythe had begun legal studies under the tutelage of an attorney in Prescott, riding there twice weekly while continuing to teach at the schoolhouse. The territorial legislature was considering a bill to allow women to serve in judicial capacities, a controversial measure, but one with the governor's support. Samuel continued as marshal, working to rebuild trust between the law and the citizens of Rawhide County. Their wedding, a month after Pierce's arrest, had been attended by nearly the entire town, a celebration not just of their union but of the community's liberation from fear. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Lawson," Samuel said, coming to join her on the porch with 2 steaming cups. Blythe accepted her coffee with a smile. "I was thinking about beginnings and endings, how sometimes they're the same thing, philosophical this morning." He settled beside her on the porch swing, his free arms slipping around her shoulders. "I received a letter from the governor yesterday," she said after a moment. "The judicial bill passed. Once I complete my legal training, I can be appointed as a circuit judge for the Northern District." Samuel's face brightened. "Blythe, that's wonderful news. It won't be easy," she cautioned. "There will be resistance, prejudice. And you'll face it with the same courage you've shown all along." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I couldn't be prouder to be your husband. Even when I'm sentencing outlaws you've arrested, no conflicts of interest there," she teased. "We'll manage." His expression grew serious. You know what I thought the first time I saw you, at that whipping post? Blythe shook her head. I thought, there's a woman who knows her own mind, no matter the cost. His fingers traced the curve of her cheek. I'd never seen such dignity in the face of cruelty. I knew then that Rawhide held something special, though I didn't yet understand it was you. And when you cut me down and told me to tell you everything I was thinking, her voice softened at the memory. I knew I wanted to hear every thought in that remarkable mind for as long as you'd share them with me. Samuel's smile was tender. I still do. Blythe leaned against him, watching the morning sun illuminate the landscape they now called home. I'm thinking, she said slowly, that I've never been happier than I am right now with you. Even with the scars. His hand gently touched her back where the marks of the whip would always remain, faded but present, especially with the scars, she replied. They remind me of what we overcame. What we built together from the ruins of Pierce's tyranny. Samuel's arm tightened around her. To new beginnings, then. And to speaking our minds, Blythe added, turning to kiss him as the sun rose higher over Rawhide, bathing their future in golden light. In the years that followed, Rawhide grew and prospered under the watchful eyes of its marshal and its first woman judge. Children born during that time would grow up hearing the story of the schoolteacher who was whipped for speaking her mind and the marshal who asked to hear her every thought. It became a kind of origin story for the town, a reminder that justice sometimes came at a cost, but was always worth fighting for. And in the Lawson household, where opinions were valued and minds were respected, the tradition of speaking freely became the foundation of a love that only deepened with time.